I can't say exactly what it is about the game that pulled me in just from the marketing. I've never been into Assassin's Creed franchise to say the least. In fact, the only other Assassin's Creed game I've actually played is apparently the best one, which is 2. Now that is a fantastic game. I revisited it recently on my Series X, as it was one of the many games I got for dirt cheap on the Black Friday sale on the Microsoft Store. It's aged quite well, the game still looks great, the only thing that hasn't aged well is the controls. You can very much tell it's a game of its time because of the button mapping. However, it didn't change my enjoyment. I'd not paid any notice of the series since then, and if this game wasn't called Assassin's Creed, I wouldn't have any idea if they were linked. But I wouldn't really say that that's an all too negative thing. I'm sure as a long-standing fan you will disagree with me, tell me that the game is trash or whatever, it's jumped the shark, but coming from a relatively fresh pair of eyes, I have to say the game is very enjoyable. So he plays Eivor, a young Viking kid, who you choose the gender of at the beginning of the game. The story doesn't change from that, but it's just giving the player that extra choice. I have to say, as a protagonist, Eivor isn't exactly on par with Ezio from Assassin's Creed 2, but he's not the blandest character ever. I've noticed that even after all these years and all the Assassin's Creed games later, Ezio is still seen as the poster boy for the franchise, so stepping into his boots will always cause division from the loyalists of a franchise. I won't go too deep into the story as the game is still relatively new, and not everyone will have a chance to play, so it's only fair. However, if you've researched or been taught any of the history about the Viking invasion of England, you won't entirely be surprised by the plotline. The game starts off in an absolutely beautiful landscape of Norway. I think I spent my first 5 hours of my gameplay exploring as much as Norway as I could. The world is stunning if you can play it in 4K. Of course, because it's a Ubisoft game, there are going to be bugs. I've got to say, surprisingly though, I've only noticed a couple so far. One particular one was I jumped on a rock and I just could not move off of it. So I had to fast travel away out of it and then retrace my steps. The world exploration in this game is, I would say, on par with how I felt when I first played Breath of the Wild. The world map is huge, and if you don't want to progress the plot a lot, that's absolutely fine. You can just go along as you see fit. It doesn't stop you from doing anything. Some are in places that have high level enemies, however the game mechanics allow you to sneak past them unseen. I mean, isn't that the mark of a great assassin after all? You have a few travel options available in the game: travel by boat along with Eivor's crew, or travel by horse or on land, which you can summon absolutely anywhere, even on the top of a mountain, which I had fun messing around with that. Or you can just go by foot if you want, it's your call. However, like Breath of the Wild, once you activate a viewpoint, you can fast travel to them, making traversal much less of a chore. The game does encourage you to use your boat as much as possible, as this is how you gain experience and supplies from your settlement, by completing raids on close-by settlements. The AI of the crew leaves a lot to be desired, however, and can definitely feel like you're single-handedly doing the raid on your own. But there are instances having a crew with you is vital, as some loot chests and doors can't be opened by just the player. Combat for me anyway was tricky at first, but easy enough to pick up with a bit of practice. I imagine for long-standing fans, you won't have this issue. It's okay, but could be better. The high-level enemies, however, are no joke. They fight you and will probably kill you unless you want to spend 20 minutes fighting one regular enemy. Leveling up honestly doesn't really take that long. I wouldn't say stealth is a huge part of the game compared to Assassin's Creed 2. After replaying, I remembered why the stealth used to piss me off so much. Mainly because there was so many instances where it was just needed and I just plain sucked at it. The AI just doesn't seem to notice you as much in Valhalla. I swear the guys in 2 would see Ezio from a mile away and still somehow be on your ass within seconds. Like I said previously, the only time I really used it was when I was sneaking to viewpoints, and the occasional assassination. It just seems like it was an afterthought and forced in it just to qualify this as an Assassin's Creed game. As much as I can sing the game's praises for being a fantastic Viking game, is it really an Assassin's Creed game? I mean, sure, that's the point of the game, is to execute members of the Order, aka the Templars, but I feel like that's a secondary objective to the game. It very much feels like this is supposed to be essentially a new IP, but they didn't think it was going to sell, so they just added Assassin's Creed to the title. And for that, I think it's being judged more harshly than it really deserves. Anima's side plot really adds nothing to the game and just only accentuates how boring the future top plot line is and could have easily been discarded. If we take a step back and look at a TV series which we could use to compare, so for example American Horror Story, I know they're not the same genre, but if you look at it that way, American Horror Story is an anthology. So every season has a different setting and a different set of characters, and they're not particularly linked heavily, but they're still under the same branding. I think that's what Ubisoft is trying to make Assassin's Creed, but they realise that they have to keep the games linked somehow, when I argue they don't really have to do that. Every game is set in a completely different time and location with new sets of characters anyway, but the person in the Animus is the only thing that's linking the games to each other, and it just makes no sense. Now, Assassin's Creed 1 to 3 did the same thing with Desmond, fine. But if Desmond wasn't in the game at all, would anyone really have cared or noticed? The games work easily as well as if they were just all kept separate stories with no forced linking together. Is it really believable that our bland future characters Desmond and Layla are related to all these significant historical people? Would it really damage the franchise in the long run if the games were solely based in that time period alone and without the plot of the Animus? From what we know of these kind of games, it could still be implied that that is happening in the background without it actually being shown, because all it does is grind the game's progression to a halt, and it makes it less interesting when you're playing these sections. That's why I open this question to you, the audience. Does Assassin's Creed really benefit from the links from game to game, or do you think they can work as independent narratives? From looking at the fan opinions, it seems like somewhat of the reboot of the series since Origins. The reception's been mixed, to say the least, and I think I have to go back and play these games myself to see if I agree. Because like I said, I've not played any of the games since 2. Valhalla is the game that I've come back to in the series. So far, I would say I am enjoying it. I just wouldn't really class it as the same league as Assassin's Creed 2 because it just doesn't feel like the same game. It's a good game, it's just not a good Assassin's Creed game.